The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and gold, when Clara Whitmore stepped onto the wooden platform of the small, weather-beaten train station. Her worn satchel clutched tightly to her side held the remnants of her life in her hometown. A few tattered dresses, a handful of coins, and memories too heavy to carry. The morning air smelled of coal smoke, damp earth, and distant pine forests, a scent that both comforted and tormented her. Today, she thought, was her chance to escape the relentless grip of poverty and sorrow that had shadowed her since her husband's death 3 months ago. Clara's fingers brushed the last coin in her pocket, a simple copper piece that had become both her treasure and her torment. It was meant to pay for the train ticket, the bridge to a new beginning. Yet she hesitated, her heart caught between fear and hope. She was tired of the judgmental stares in town, the whispers questioning how a widow could survive alone. The train station buzzed with activity, merchants unloading crates, children chasing each other across the platform, and travelers hurrying toward the iron tracks, each carrying their own stories of departure and reunion. Amid the chaos, a lone figure caught her eye. A man, tall and rugged, leaned against a post, frowning at a small pile of supplies beside him. His clothes were worn, boots caked in mud, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed his sharp features. His horse, restless and fidgeting, pawed the ground anxiously. Clara watched as the man dug into his pockets, patting them one by one, only to find them empty. There was an air of quiet desperation about him, a familiarity in the weariness of someone burdened with unspoken troubles. Something inside Clara stirred a sudden impulse of compassion she hadn't felt in weeks. Without thinking of the consequences, she approached him. "Here," she said, extending the small copper coin in her palm. "This should cover what you need." The man looked up, surprise and gratitude flashing across his eyes. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice low but steady. There was something in his tone, an unspoken weight of humility that made her heart ache. Clara shook her head. "Just pay it forward someday," she murmured, before stepping back toward the train. She didn't see the shadow of a smile that crossed his face, fleeting but genuine. He tucked the coin into his pocket and, without another word, mounted his horse and disappeared down the dusty road, leaving behind only the faint scent of leather and earth. Clara's thoughts returned to her own troubles as she boarded the train. The carriage was nearly empty, save for a few weary travelers staring out at the rolling fields. She sank into the worn bench, the coin now heavy in her memory. How strange, she thought, that a single act of generosity could make one feel both stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. As the train whistled and began to move, she pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching her hometown shrink into a mosaic of brown roofs and golden fields. A mix of fear and anticipation gnawed at her stomach. She didn't know what awaited her in the city, what challenges, what heartbreak, or what unexpected encounters. But she knew she had taken a small, trembling step toward a life that might offer something more than survival. Somewhere down the horizon, the cowboy rode on, unaware that this coin, so small and seemingly insignificant, had set the stage for a meeting that would change both their lives forever. Clara, for her part, remained blissfully unaware that the man she had helped at the station was no ordinary traveler. He was the owner of Boone Ridge Ranch, a man of wealth and influence whose life had been as solitary and demanding as hers in different ways. Yet the threads of fate had begun to weave them together, spun by a single act of kindness on a quiet morning at a humble station. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dusty road as Colton Boone rode away from the station, the copper coin heavy in his pocket yet light in his heart. He didn't wear the attire of a wealthy ranch owner. His jeans were faded, His shirt stained from early morning chores, and a wide-brimmed hat shielded his face. Most people saw only a rugged cowboy, an ordinary man of the plains. Few would have guessed that he was the owner of Boone Ridge Ranch, a sprawling estate of rolling pastures, herds of cattle, and buildings that gleamed like a small town in the morning sun. Today, however, he had chosen to leave that world behind, even if only for a few hours, to walk among ordinary people unnoticed. As he rode, Colton couldn't stop thinking about the young widow at the station, Clara Whitmore. There was something about her, something more than her kindness in handing him the coin. It was the quiet strength in her posture, the way her eyes had lingered on his restless horse before offering help, the subtle dignity that no hardship seemed to have broken. Most people, he knew, would have looked at him and assumed wealth or status and perhaps judged him accordingly. Clara had not. She had seen a man, not a title. Colton's curiosity grew with each mile. He wanted to know her story, to understand how she had come to live with such quiet resilience, how she faced the world alone yet refused to let bitterness shape her. The brief encounter at the station had left an impression deeper than he expected. Wealth, he realized, could never buy the authenticity and courage he had glimpsed in her eyes. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her train carriage, her mind replaying the events of the morning. She couldn't stop wondering about the cowboy she had helped. There was a sense of intrigue and curiosity mingled with that familiar knot of worry about her uncertain future. She imagined him riding across the plains, tall and solitary, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly, a sensation she hadn't felt since her husband passed. It was a feeling both foreign and welcome, a spark of human connection that seemed almost impossible in her current life of loss and uncertainty. Colton, unaware of her thoughts, approached the next town with caution. He dismounted at a small watering hole, careful to keep to the background as townsfolk moved around him. His purpose was not just to observe, but to test his own patience. He often wondered whether people's true character shone only when they didn't know a man's wealth or influence. Clara's actions at the station were proof. She had acted from instinct, from empathy, not expectation. That rare quality drew him toward her, though he knew revealing his identity too soon could change everything. People treated the rich differently, and he didn't want her kindness to be tainted by obligation or curiosity about his status. As the day passed, he made a small decision, one that would unknowingly shape both their lives. He would help her again, but anonymously. Perhaps the universe, he thought, had a way of bringing the right people together in the most unlikely ways. And Clara, with her resilience and honesty, deserved a chance at a fresh start, even if she didn't know it yet. By evening, the town was quiet, the streets emptying as the sun dipped below the horizon. Colton leaned against a fence post, watching the last golden rays fall across the fields. He thought about the coin again, the simple act that had connected him to a woman he barely knew. It was remarkable, he realized, how a fleeting moment of generosity could leave a mark on both hearts. Unseen and unknown to Clara, Colton had already begun to plan the next step. He would find a way to cross paths with her again, to test her mettle, to see how she navigated a world that had been unkind yet not entirely unforgiving. For now, though, he rode on, silent and patient, the image of her soft, determined eyes burning quietly in his mind. Fate, he mused, sometimes worked in whispers, not shouts, and he was ready to listen. The train rattled and hissed along the tracks, carrying Clara Whitmore closer to a life she barely dared to imagine. Yet when she stepped onto the platform of the small town she had chosen as her first stop, the promise of opportunity was quickly clouded by a cold, hard reality. Her hopes of finding honest work clashed immediately with the town's undercurrent of suspicion toward strangers, especially women traveling alone. Every door she knocked on seemed to close a little faster, every smile she offered was met with hesitation. She began to wonder if her bravery at the station had been in vain. If the coin she had given away had been the last spark of fortune she would ever feel. Her first attempt at finding employment was at the local inn, a modest establishment with peeling paint and creaking floorboards. The innkeeper, a stout man with a bushy mustache, appeared welcoming at first, praising her manners and seeming impressed by her willingness to work long hours. Clara's spirits lifted slightly as he led her toward the kitchen, speaking of sweeping floors and tending to guests. But by the end of the day, she realized she had been deceived. The innkeeper had promised wages that would cover at least a month's rent, only to claim she owed for her board and meals, leaving her with nothing. The realization hit her like a cruel winter wind. She had arrived with hope, only to face betrayal. Disheartened and weary, Clara wandered toward the edge of town, her thoughts heavy with the kind of doubt that gnaws at the soul. She had always believed that hard work and integrity would suffice to earn a place in the world, but now she questioned whether kindness and honesty were enough in a world so often ruled by greed and suspicion. Every face in the crowded streets seemed indifferent. Every hand offered in greeting either hurried past or clutched a coin purse too tightly to share. Clara felt the familiar sting of loneliness, the ache of being invisible in a place where everyone was watching yet no one truly saw. Meanwhile, Colton Boone had arrived in the same town, though his path was intentionally hidden from Clara's eyes. Riding under the guise of Cal, a wandering cowboy with no ties, he observed her struggles from a distance. He watched as she confronted the innkeeper, as she refused to beg or fight, as she walked away with dignity even when wronged. Each step she took, each moment of quiet resilience, deepened his fascination. She had not sought charity, yet she had not allowed misfortune to crush her spirit. This combination of strength and humility, he thought, was rarer than gold in these lands. Colton's plan began to take shape. He could not allow her to flounder in a town that seemed intent on testing her limits. Without revealing his identity, he would provide her an opportunity, a safe, meaningful place to work where her efforts would be valued and her character appreciated. It was risky, but he believed that Clara deserved more than mere survival. She deserved a chance to thrive. He quietly left a folded note at the edge of the town, near where she had taken shelter under the shade of a large oak tree. The note was simple, yet it carried hope, a promise of temporary work at a ranch in the outskirts, under a name she had not heard before. Clara discovered the note the following morning, its paper rough but neatly folded. Her eyes scanned the words, and a spark of cautious excitement lit within her. It was almost too good to be true, a job, protection, and a sense of purpose she had been craving. Yet the mystery gnawed at her. Who had left it? Why did they help her without revealing themselves? The question stirred both curiosity and wariness, but Clara's need for stability outweighed her doubts. She made her decision quickly, her practical mind refusing to linger on speculation. She would go. She would take the chance and step into a new chapter. Even if the path was unknown and fraught with uncertainty, little did she know that her next destination, Boone Ridge Ranch, would transform her life in ways she could not yet comprehend. And little did she realize that the man who had silently guided her path, who had observed her struggles without interference, was the very cowboy she had helped at the station, the man who held the keys to her future in the palm of his hand. The journey from the town to Boone Ridge Ranch was long and winding, with dusty roads stretching under the endless sky. Clara Whitmore sat stiffly in the back of the wagon, clutching the reins of a borrowed horse with one hand and her satchel with the other. Her heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She had followed the cryptic note left for her, unsure of what awaited but desperate for a chance to work, to live, and perhaps to breathe freely again. The landscape gradually changed, from the sparse, worn edges of the town to rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, tall grasses swaying in the gentle breeze. She felt as though she were leaving one world behind entirely. As the wagon crested a hill, Clara's eyes widened. Spread before her was a sight she could scarcely have imagined. Boone Ridge Ranch. It was not the modest farm she had pictured, but a sprawling estate. Acres upon acres of lush pastures, grazing cattle, barns large enough to house dozens of horses, and a main house that gleamed with polished wood and stone. Workers moved across the fields, attending to livestock and repairing fences, each one carrying themselves with purpose and familiarity in a place that clearly ran like a well-oiled machine. Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was a life she had never dreamed of touching. A world so far removed from her own struggles. Colton Boone, watching from a distance atop a hill under the guise of Cal, allowed himself a small, private smile. He had anticipated her awe but wanted her first impressions to be her own, untouched by knowledge of his true identity. He observed quietly as Clara's eyes darted from the grazing cattle to the barns, from the workers' efficient movements to the sparkling facade of the main house. She had expected a humble refuge. Instead, she found herself in the heart of a vast, self-sustaining empire. The wagon slowed, pulling into the stable yard where the ranch hands had gathered. Clara clutched her satchel tighter, aware that every step forward felt like crossing into an unfamiliar, intimidating territory. The head ranch hand, a grizzled man named Hank, stepped forward with a measured, assessing gaze. "You must be the new help," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Name?" "Clara Whitmore," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. She set her satchel down and took a deep breath. "I was told you needed help." Hank nodded once, motioning for her to follow him. "We'll see what you've got." His words were blunt, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes, as if he recognized someone worth testing. Clara felt both relief and apprehension. She knew she would have to prove herself quickly if she were to be taken seriously in this place. Colton, still hidden from view, allowed himself a moment of quiet admiration. There was something in the way Clara held herself that drew his attention. She did not cower. She did not plead. She did not shrink under the weight of the unexpected grandeur surrounding her. She observed, absorbed, and adapted, a quality rare in someone so unaccustomed to privilege. It was precisely this blend of humility and resilience that intrigued him, reminding him of the coin she had given him weeks ago. That single act of generosity had marked her character, but now her courage and composure were proving the depth of her strength. As she moved to tend to the horses, the scent of hay and leather filling her senses, Clara felt a mixture of awe and determination. Boone Ridge was unlike anything she had ever known, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Every careful step she took, every task she completed, carried her further from her past struggles and closer to a future she dared to hope for, unseen by her. Colton continued to watch, silently judging yet secretly admiring her every movement. He knew that the coming days would test Clara in ways neither of them could yet imagine, but he also recognized the spark of potential, a spark that could flourish into something extraordinary if nurtured with care, patience, and perhaps a touch of fate. Boone Ridge Ranch, vast and imposing as it was, had just welcomed a young widow whose heart was braver than she realized. And Colton Boone, in his hidden identity, could not have been more certain that her arrival would change everything. The days at Boone Ridge Ranch passed with a rhythm that was both exhausting and invigorating for Clara Whitmore. She rose with the sun, the chill of early morning biting at her fingers as she carried feed to the horses and tended to the cattle. Every chore demanded her full attention, mending fences, guiding livestock, and learning the subtle signs of the land, from the soft shift of the wind to the wary movements of a stray horse. Each evening, she returned to the small cabin provided for her. Sore but satisfied, a sense of accomplishment warming her tired bones. Colton Boone, still in the guise of the mysterious ranch hand Cal, observed her quietly from a distance, his attention caught by her diligence and composure. He noticed how she adjusted her stance when lifting heavy sacks, how she approached frightened animals with patience, and how she never complained, even when tasks seemed endless. There was something magnetic about the way she carried herself, a combination of strength, humility, and grace. To him, Clara was not simply a worker at the ranch. She was a force of nature, unpolished yet undeniably remarkable. Gradually, small interactions began to shape a bond between them. Clara, unaware of Cal's true identity, found herself drawn to him despite the mysterious air he carried. He was patient, never intrusive, offering guidance only when necessary, and his humor was subtle, a quiet presence that made her mornings lighter. Sometimes he would join her in tending the fields, sharing the work silently, his occasional jokes breaking the tension of long hours. Clara's laughter, rare in recent months, started to return, echoing across the pastures, and Colton found himself seeking her out more often under the pretense of work. Their connection deepened during evenings by the stable or the campfire. They spoke of simple things, childhood memories, favorite places, and dreams for the future, but always skirted the topic of wealth, status, or past hardships. Clara felt she could be herself, stripped of pretense and expectation, while Colton admired her openness. Each story she shared, each smile, each small act of thoughtfulness strengthened his affection. Her resilience in the face of adversity resonated with him, echoing the values he held dear but rarely encountered in others. The other ranch hands began to notice the growing camaraderie, though they were unaware of its depth. They whispered in passing, commenting on Clara's steady hand and her ability to handle challenges that even seasoned workers found daunting. They remarked on Cal's unusual attentiveness, a rare gentleness in a world where men of his type were often brusque and unyielding. While Clara remained oblivious to the reason behind his presence, the subtle care he showed her made the long days feel lighter, and the work more meaningful. Despite this growing closeness, a quiet tension lingered in the air. Clara's modesty and pride prevented her from acknowledging the feelings budding within her, while Colton wrestled with the knowledge that revealing his true identity too soon could disrupt the fragile balance of trust and admiration they were building. He feared that the revelation of his wealth and status might make her question every interaction, every kindness he had shown. Yet each day, he found it harder to suppress the longing to tell her the truth. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the western hills, Clara stumbled while leading a frightened horse back to the barn. Instinctively, Colton reached out, steadying her with a firm yet gentle hand. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. In that simple moment, laden with unspoken understanding, both realized that their bond had grown into something more than friendship. As Clara caught her breath and smiled, unaware of the storm of emotion she had stirred, Colton felt a rare vulnerability. For the first time, he wanted something more than observation or protection. He wanted to share his life, his ranch, and perhaps his heart with her. Yet the secret of his identity remained, a silent shadow over their growing affection, promising both a deeper connection and a stormy revelation in the days to come. The rhythm of life at Boone Ridge Ranch had settled into something familiar, but beneath the calm surface, tension was quietly simmering. Clara Whitmore, despite her growing confidence and respect among the ranch hands, still felt like an outsider in this sprawling world of wealth and tradition. Every day brought new tasks, but also subtle reminders of her humble beginnings. She could sense, in fleeting glances or hushed conversations, that some of the workers and townsfolk regarded her with curiosity or skepticism. She had learned to ignore it until certain murmurs began to gnaw at her. Colton Boone, still carefully maintaining his disguise as Cal, observed these undercurrents with a mixture of concern and frustration. It was not just the small-town whispers or the jealousy of lesser ranchers that threatened the fragile peace. It was the delicate balance of his relationship with Clara. He could see the doubts flicker in her eyes when she overheard snippets of gossip or noticed the subtle looks from other workers. She worked tirelessly, giving her best at every turn. Yet the invisible walls of status and secrecy loomed over her, threatening to undermine her sense of belonging. One afternoon, the town sheriff's son came riding to the ranch with news that stirred unease. A rival landowner had spread rumors about Boone Ridge, questioning the integrity of its management and hinting that the ranch owner, wealthy and influential, was unkind and manipulative. While Clara knew nothing of Colton's true position, she felt the tension in the air. Some workers whispered their concerns, casting cautious glances toward Cal, who simply nodded and offered reassurance without explanation. Colton understood the risk. If Clara discovered his identity through gossip rather than trust, the trust they had painstakingly built could crumble. Meanwhile, Clara grappled with her own inner conflicts. She liked Cal more than she had expected, but part of her hesitated to trust a man who seemed so distant and secretive. She found herself analyzing his every action, wondering why he offered guidance yet avoided personal questions, why he seemed present yet slightly aloof. The uncertainty both intrigued and frustrated her, making her heart and mind a battleground of hope and fear. She began to question her place at Boone Ridge, unsure if her presence was genuinely valued or merely tolerated by circumstances. Colton, for his part, faced an equally daunting challenge. Every moment he spent with Clara deepened his affection, but the secret of his wealth and status weighed heavily. He feared that revealing it too soon could damage her perception of him, while withholding it too long risked building a wall of deception between them. His solution was careful observation and gentle guidance, allowing her to shine, ensuring she felt respected and capable while keeping his true self hidden. It was a delicate dance, requiring patience, subtlety, and constant vigilance. As the days passed, the tension between secrecy and connection grew. Clara noticed the occasional glances from Colton, moments when his eyes lingered a second too long, a fleeting touch when guiding her hands during tasks. These small gestures sparked both hope and confusion, emotion she was unaccustomed to handling alone. She began to suspect that something in Cal's past or identity was being withheld. But she had no proof, only intuition and a growing attachment she could not ignore. One evening, after a long day repairing fences, Colton and Clara sat quietly on a ridge overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the air carrying the scent of fresh grass and hay. Silence stretched between them, comfortable yet tense. Clara finally broke it, her voice soft but steady. "I feel like there's more to you than you're telling me, Cal. I can't explain it, but I sense it." Colton's jaw tightened slightly. He wanted to reach for her hand, to speak the truth, yet the weight of secrecy held him back. "Some stories, Clara. Take time to tell," he murmured, eyes on the horizon. "The truth will come when the time is right." As the sun dipped below the hills, the shadow of unspoken truths and hidden identities loomed large over both of them. Boone Ridge Ranch, beautiful and abundant as it was, had become a crucible for testing trust, resilience, and love forces neither Clara nor Colton could afford to ignore. The evening air at Boone Ridge Ranch was unusually still, the kind of silence that often precedes trouble. Clara Whitmore had finished her chores and was walking toward the stable with a lantern in hand, the soft glow casting long shadows across the pasture. The ranch seemed peaceful, almost serene, but Colton Boone, still watching from a distance as Cal felt the unease in his gut that only years of experience on the plains could bring. Something was off. The cattle were restless, the horses snorting and stamping more than usual, and a faint, unfamiliar sound carried across the field's soft hooves, but not from the ranch's own stock. Clara was unaware of the danger creeping closer. She hummed quietly to herself, trying to calm the animals as she approached the barn, when a sudden rustling in the nearby brush made her freeze. Shadows moved quickly, dark shapes darting between the fence posts. Her heart jumped. Rustlers. The word barely formed in her mind when the first intruder emerged, lasso in hand, aiming for one of the prized horses. Instinct took over. Clara's voice rang out, strong and commanding. "Hey, get back." The rustlers hesitated, clearly surprised by her courage. One of them lunged toward her, and she narrowly sidestepped, grabbing a sturdy pitchfork she had leaned against the barn wall. She swung it with all the force she could muster, and the intruder stumbled, giving her precious seconds to think. Her training on the ranch, combined with a desperate resolve to survive, allowed her to maneuver quickly, guiding the frightened horse into the barn and securing the gate. Colton, riding hard and fast, arrived just as the first skirmish intensified. He dismounted and moved with precision, disarming one of the rustlers and forcing the others to scatter into the shadows. Clara's bravery had bought them time, and Colton's strength and skill finished the confrontation. The rustlers fled into the night, leaving the ranch shaken but intact. After the chaos subsided, Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the pitchfork. Her chest heaved, her mind racing with adrenaline and fear, but also a strange, unspoken pride. She had faced danger and stood her ground. Colton approached her silently, his eyes searching hers for any sign of injury. When he saw none, he allowed himself a rare, small smile, a mixture of relief and admiration. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I've rarely seen anyone handle themselves like that." Clara shook her head, still trying to calm her racing heart. I just did what I had to. I couldn't let them take the horses." She looked at him, realizing in that moment how much she relied on his presence, even without knowing the full truth about him. There was a connection now, forged in fire and danger, stronger than anything either of them had anticipated. Colton's thoughts drifted briefly to the coin she had lent him weeks ago at the station. That single act of kindness, a moment of human generosity, had led to this an unexpected bond strengthened by courage and trust. He realized with clarity that his feelings for Clara had deepened beyond admiration or intrigue. He cared for her, deeply and irrevocably. But the secret of his identity still weighed heavily. How could he protect her, honor her courage, and yet keep the truth hidden? The rest of the evening was spent securing the ranch, checking fences, and ensuring the livestock were safe. Yet, a new tension hung in the air, one born not from fear of rustlers alone, but from the knowledge that Clara had proven herself braver than many who had grown up on Boone Ridge. She had faced danger and survived, earning not just Colton's admiration but the respect of every worker who had witnessed her. Courage from a distance. As they finally paused near the main house, the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, Colton found himself walking beside Clara, their shoulders brushing. The silence was no longer just quiet, it was filled with shared understanding, unspoken gratitude, and a fragile, growing intimacy. In that moment, Boone Ridge Ranch became more than a home or a workplace. It became the place where two souls, drawn together by fate and courage, began to acknowledge the bond forming between them, a bond that danger had revealed and challenge had strengthened. The morning at Boone Ridge Ranch began quietly, with the soft light of dawn spilling over the hills and grazing pastures. Clara Whitmore moved through her chores with practiced efficiency, but her thoughts kept drifting to the events of the previous night. The rustler's attack had shaken her, yet it had also stirred something unexpected, a sense of belonging, a realization that she was no longer merely surviving but contributing to something larger than herself. She couldn't shake the memory of Colton's presence, the way his calm and decisive actions had guided her when danger loomed. She felt a strange mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something more. Colton Boone, meanwhile, wrestled with his own unrest. Watching Clara grow into her role at the ranch, seeing her courage, kindness, and resilience, had only deepened his affection. The secret of his identity, once a shield meant to allow her to know him for who he truly was, had begun to feel like a barrier. The longer he waited, the greater the risk of misunderstanding or resentment. She deserved honesty, and perhaps it was time to trust that their bond could withstand the truth. He called Clara to the main house under the pretense of needing her help with a minor task. She approached cautiously, curiosity dancing in her eyes. The sun cast golden light on the sprawling facade of the mansion, making it glow almost ethereally. Colton met her at the porch, the familiar shadow of Cal replaced by the confident stance of the ranch owner. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confession. "Clara," he began, voice steady but carrying the weight of gravity, "there's something I've been keeping from you." She tilted her head, a faint frown of puzzlement creasing her forehead. "What do you mean?" Colton motioned for her to follow him inside, where the grandeur of Boone Ridge was revealed in full polished wood floors, elegant furnishings, and walls lined with portraits of Boone family members who had shaped the ranch's legacy. Clara's eyes widened, and she took a cautious step backward. This is your home?" she whispered. Colton nodded, removing his hat and letting his gaze meet hers. "I am the owner of Boone Ridge Ranch." The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. Her mind raced with disbelief, confusion, and a sudden swirl of emotions she struggled to name. The cowboy who had worked beside her, laughed with her, guided her with patience and quiet humor. This man, the man who had seemed so humble and real, was a wealthy landowner. Her first instinct was betrayal, a sharp pang of mistrust. You knew I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "All this time, why didn't you tell me?" Colton stepped closer, his expression earnest and unguarded. "Because I wanted you to see me, Clara, not my name, not my wealth, not my status. I wanted you to know me for who I am, not for what I own." His hands, strong and reassuring, reached for hers. "Everything I've done, everything I've asked of you, it was because I respect you, because I admire you. I never wanted to deceive you, only to protect the honesty between us until I knew we could face this truth together." Clara's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief, hurt, and growing understanding. She looked at him, seeing not just a wealthy man, but the same cowboy she had lent her last coin to weeks ago, the man who had quietly observed her struggles, the one who had protected and admired her, the one who had begun to occupy her thoughts in ways she had barely acknowledged. The weight of misunderstanding slowly lifted, replaced by a fragile but undeniable trust. Clara allowed herself to exhale, leaning slightly closer. I think I understand," she murmured. "It's just a lot to take in." Colton smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know, and we'll face it together. Boone Ridge is not just my home, it can be ours, if you'll let it be." In that moment, the walls of secrecy crumbled, leaving only truth, respect, and the beginning of a love that had been quietly building through days of labor, laughter, and shared courage. Clara realized that the coin she had given at the station had sparked not just a connection, but a journey, one that had led her from survival to belonging, from uncertainty to a future she could finally imagine with hope. The revelation of Colton Boone's true identity hung in the air like a tangible presence, yet it no longer carried the weight of deception. Clara Whitmore walked through Boone Ridge Ranch with a mixture of awe and cautious acceptance, her mind replaying the events of the morning over and over. She could still scarcely believe that the humble cowboy she had befriended, admired, laughed with, and even trusted with her heart was the very owner of this vast estate. And yet, as she glanced at Colton, who now moved with a quiet, confident authority unmasked by disguise, she saw the same man she had known, patient, observant, and deeply caring. The ranch hands, who had long grown accustomed to her presence and dedication, noticed the subtle shift in their interactions. Clara moved with newfound ease, no longer weighed down by uncertainty, her confidence amplified not just by her growing skill, but by the knowledge that her place at Boone Ridge was recognized and valued by its owner himself. The subtle glances, the quiet nods of respect, and even the occasional teasing remarks became easier to bear, for she no longer felt like an outsider navigating a world that had previously seemed beyond her reach. Colton, walking beside her, sensed the delicate balance of emotion in every step she took. He had been anxious about the fallout from his revelation, worried that the bond they had built might fracture under the weight of truth. Yet as he observed Clara's resilience and the clarity in her eyes, he realized that the honesty they shared had only strengthened their connection. She had seen him for who he was at his core, and he had finally let go of the barrier that secrecy had once created. The morning tasks, feeding cattle, checking fences, and inspecting pastures, were undertaken side by side, yet there was a new dimension to every movement, every word exchanged. The labor of the ranch, once simply work, became a canvas for trust and mutual respect. Clara's competence and courage, already well established, now had the added layer of recognition from Colton, which made her efforts feel significant in a way they never had before. Meanwhile, Colton's careful guidance transitioned seamlessly into mentorship and partnership, showing her that wealth and status were not barriers to understanding, but tools to be shared responsibly with those who had earned trust. Word of Clara's role at Boone Ridge and her part in the previous night as confrontation with the rustlers began to spread through the surrounding communities. The townsfolk, who had once whispered doubts about the young widow, now regarded her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Those who had doubted her character now saw a woman of strength and integrity, capable of not only surviving hardship, but thriving in the face of challenge. Colton watched these interactions with pride, aware that Clara's influence extended beyond the ranch itself. She had become a symbol of resilience and courage, someone whose actions resonated with honesty and conviction. By midday, the tension of the previous weeks had transformed into a quiet, steady rhythm of acceptance and connection. Clara allowed herself to laugh freely with the ranch hands, her voice no longer carrying the tremor of insecurity. She shared stories of her life, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a testament to survival, to courage, and to hope. Colton, standing nearby, felt a warmth he had long avoided, acknowledging pride, love, and a profound sense of belonging. As the sun began to sink behind the rolling hills, Clara and Colton paused on the ridge overlooking the ranch. The golden light bathed the pastures in warmth, and for the first time, Clara felt completely at home. The challenges, the secrets, and the moments of fear had culminated in a truth that was undeniable. They had found in each other a partner, an ally, and perhaps even love. In that serene moment, Boone Ridge Ranch was no longer just land and livestock. It was a sanctuary of trust, courage, and newfound happiness. Clara's journey from struggling widow to valued member of the ranch, and Colton's careful unveiling of his identity, had led them both to this point a harmonious resolution of hearts and minds, ready to embrace whatever the future held together. The morning sun rose over Boone Ridge Ranch like a promise, spilling golden light across the rolling pastures and grazing cattle. Clara Whitmore stood on the porch of the main house, her fingers brushing the warm wood railing as she looked out over the land that had become her home. The ranch, once an intimidating expanse of unknown possibilities, now felt like an extension of herself. Every hill, every fence, every barn held the memory of hard work, courage, and the quiet victories of the past weeks. Colton Boone appeared beside her, the sunlight catching the edge of his hat and the sharp lines of his familiar, rugged face. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. There was no need for words. The bond they shared was clear, unspoken yet undeniable. In the quiet of dawn, they both understood that their journey from a brief encounter at a dusty train station to the trials and revelations of Boone Ridge had brought them to a place neither had expected, but both had earned. Life at the ranch had settled into a rhythm, a balance of labor and companionship. Clara's days were filled with meaningful work tending livestock, managing supplies, and mentoring newer hands, but now there was a sense of ownership in her efforts, a recognition of her contributions that went beyond mere survival. Colton had begun including her in the larger decisions of the ranch, sharing insights into its operations and seeking her perspective. Her opinion mattered, not because she was the widow who had once lent a coin, but because she had earned respect through dedication, intelligence, and integrity. The workers, too, had grown close to Clara, viewing her not only as a competent colleague but as a vital part of the Boone Ridge family. They looked to her in moments of uncertainty, knowing she would act with fairness and courage, just as she had during the rustler attack. Her laughter and easy confidence now echoed across the pastures, a stark contrast to the timid, unsure widow who had arrived weeks ago. The transformation was evident to everyone who witnessed it, a testament to perseverance, resilience, and the subtle power of kindness. Colton watched her often, a quiet pride in his chest that words could never capture. The secret he had once carried, the careful disguise of Cal, was no longer necessary. They had faced danger together, survived misunderstandings, and now embraced the truth of who they were to each other. His admiration for Clara had blossomed into love, deep and unwavering, and he knew that the foundation they had built, trust, respect, and shared experience, would endure. That afternoon, they walked the length of the ranch together, hands intertwined, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams for the future. Clara spoke of small improvements she wanted to make, ways to care for the animals better, ideas to support the workers, and Colton listened intently, valuing her insight. It was a partnership in every sense, a blending of hearts and minds that extended beyond romance into every facet of life at Boone Ridge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Clara looked back to the train station where her journey had begun. The memory of her last coin, lent on a whim to a weary cowboy, now seemed almost magical in its significance. A simple act of generosity had set in motion a chain of events that had changed her life entirely, bringing her to safety, purpose, love, and a home she could claim as her own. In that twilight, Boone Ridge Ranch was more than a ranch. It was a testament to resilience, trust, and the quiet miracles that kindness can create. Clara and Colton stood together, the vast landscape before them symbolic of the limitless possibilities that awaited. With hearts aligned and futures intertwined, they stepped forward into their shared life, ready to face whatever trials or joys the world might bring, knowing that together they could overcome anything. The coin had been small, the gesture simple, but the impact had been monumental. And in the warm glow of the ranch, under the endless sky, Clara and Colton knew that this was only the beginning of their story.